Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Rich Steve Beck. A huge welcome to Produce, Mix, Fix and Conquer. We are super excited to join with our next guest. Really excited to have a chat with Mr. Mark Dodson. So Mark has got a phenomenal discography and back catalogue. We're going to be talking about bands that he's worked with, such as Joe Cocker, Judas Priest, Joan, Jett, Suicidal Tendencies, Anthrax. If you are a metalhead, this is the place this evening to hang out and come and have a chat with Mark. He's got some fantastic stories to share with you all. We're also maybe towards the end going to be having a chat as well about gear as well, and maybe talk about plugins and that side of things as well. But let's see how the chat goes, and let's say hi to Mr. Mark Dodson. Hey Mark, how you doing?
Hello. Hi.
Hello, welcome. How's it going? So are you enjoying lockdown? Or enjoying going to the pub now? I understand you went yesterday, is that right?
Yeah, I went on Monday for a quick one, but it was too cold basically sitting outside there. But it was nice just to be able to go to a pub again. That excited me. But then I had to question sitting in the freezing cold, waiting 20 minutes for the beer to get to me. And then I was just like, I spilt more than I drank. I was shaking so much with the cold, you know. But I got a couple of pints in, which was good. But I haven't been since. But I'm looking forward to it being normal again and hanging out.
Yeah, completely.
You know, being with your mates and having a chat. I love the pub. I'm a great pub fan. I can't deny it.
Brilliant. We're really excited to have a chat with you about your discography. So should we start off with some stories? We'll go through how you started off as an engineer. So tell us, like we've done with our previous guests, what bands way before you started off in studios and working with these amazing rock bands, what bands were you listening to back in the day as a kid, and how did you get inspired?
Yeah, well, as a kid, I kind of grew up listening to, I told you a story earlier, which I'll just recount quickly, how my brother came back from his school fair when I was 12, and he said, I've just seen this is school dance rather. And he said, I've just seen the world's greatest guitar player. And I'm like, well, what's that all about? And he said, I've just seen a guy called Eric Clapton with John Mayall's Blues Breakers. And that was at his school dance. And I'm like, wow. And there was a lot of bands played like that locally. There was a place up the road called the Toby Jug, which sadly is not there anymore. But everybody played there. Bowie played there, you know, the Who, the Stones, everybody played there. So I was kind of surrounded by that. And I liked the idea of, you know, I listened to Bob Dylan, and I was listening. It was quite diverse, really. I was listening to people like Yes. I loved the Stones. I loved the Stones. And I'd be listening to the old blues with people like Huddy Ledbetter, people like that, you know, Sonny Boy Williamson. And so I started trying to learn to play the guitar. Well, I learned to play the guitar and started writing songs, my own songs and that. And quite often I would try and record them in my front room. My mum had an old tape recorder and I recorded. And quite often my mum would come in, shut that fucking noise up, and kind of spirited me a little bit, you know. But I thought that was pretty good. Well, obviously it wasn't. But so I did that for a while, and then I went and played down a few folk clubs and sang and wrote songs and tried. But I didn't have a really good singing voice, and my songs were kind of boring. And so it wasn't really going where I wanted it to go. And so one day I was at school and I was 16. This is something that you wouldn't hear of nowadays. I was 16 and I was in the hall, the school hall. And there were a bunch of kids at one end of the hall and another bunch of kids at the other end of the hall. And I was like, well, what's going on today? What's happening? And they said, that bunch of kids there, they're staying on to sixth form, doing A-levels. And that bunch of kids over there are leaving school today. What do you want to do? I went, I didn't really like those kids. So I was like, I'm leaving. I'm going with these kids. And that was it. I went home and I said to my mum and dad, I left school today. And they went, okay, they get a job. And it was just like that. You know, it was like, there was no thought of anything else. Just like, get a job. And then my old man got me a job on telephones or something like that, which was incredibly boring. So I got through that. And I was just still dying to do something in music because I loved it so much. And I went to a studio in Clapham, and I was talking to a guy there, and I was like, you know, I'd love to work in a studio. He said, well, there's no jobs here, but there's a studio opening up down in Battersea. And he gave me the address. He said, I think they're doing it now and blah, blah, blah. So I went straight down there, and I walked into this place called Rampall on Thessaly Road in Battersea. And they were building this place at the time. It was like it was a building site basically, but there were the semblance of the studio getting going. And a guy called Serrano Langston came out, and I talked to him, and I said, I'd love to get a job here, and this, that, and the other. And he said, well, what do you know about tapes and stuff like that? And I said, well, I've been working on computers with big tapes. I said, well, I know how to put a tape on a machine. And he said, you're in. It was £8 a week. It was £8 a week, and you're in. And I was like, okay. And I just went home and told my mum and dad, I said, all right, I quit the other job, which was £30 a week with a good future. I'm going here now, £8 a week. And they were like, whatever, Mark, do what the fuck you want. So I went there and I started working there, and I helped actually put bits and pieces of it together. So I was like right in there building this place with all these other guys, chippies, and all these chippies and all these other guys all became permanent members of staff. And they were a great bunch of guys, but if they didn't like you, they weren't a great bunch of guys. So there was kind of an initiation process you had to go through. But at that time, then all of a sudden I'm there, and all of a sudden the Who decided to record. It was their studio. They decided to record Quadrophenia there, but they didn't have a board. They didn't have anything. So they rolled up Ronnie Lane's mobile outside, and they recorded all of it on Ronnie Lane's mobile. So there I am, all of a sudden from nowhere. What it was like, Rich, was walking into this studio, and I still think of it like this now. It was like the TARDIS walking into this place, because when you went in, it just went, and it was like Alice in Wonderland at the same time. And all of a sudden, you're surrounded by these people that are just incredibly talented and great at what they did. And you see them walking up and down as if nothing, and you go, whoa, that's amazing. And then they finally got the studio built. And then the first session I was ever on as a tape op, I was immediately made a tape op.
Yeah.
In America, you have to be a runner for 5 years before you can become a tape op, or assistant engineer, as it was called. Mm-hmm. So the first session I was ever on, it was Princess. I always remember this as well, because it was Princess Anne's wedding day, I think. And the pubs were open until midnight, and Joe Cocker was booked in at 9 p.m. And at 9 p.m, nothing happened. 11 came round, 12 came round, and then about 12:30, a bang on the door came. And this is gospel truth. We've opened the door of the studio, and Joe Cocker literally went straight down on his face on the floor, right there on the front of the studio. And the boys picked him up, dragged him out, put him in the control room. He's zonked, completely pissed out of his head. 4 hours later, they got a backing track. They wake him up and go, hey, Joe, we've got a backing track. Do you want to sing? And he gets up, walks out and sings. And this amazing voice comes through the speakers. And his arms are doing all this stuff. And he's singing. And you go, oh, my God, this guy is incredible. And that was my introduction to, working in a studio. And I was like, this is incredible. I don't think anybody got it. I didn't really get it at the time.
No.
I didn't. And then, of course, all these other people came through. They're doing different records and different projects. And as an assistant engineer, I was always trying to become an engineer. I wanted to be the engineer. Mm-hmm. And I didn't really get much chance to do that. And slowly but surely, you wheedle your way in. And the other assistant engineer was a guy called Will Reed Dick. And Will's a great engineer. And he went on to do Thin Lizzy and Motorhead and people like that. Saxon. Fantastic engineer. And I finally got to become an engineer, and I did Joan, Jett, this, that, and the other. But I was fortunate. There was some Icelandic guys came down to do some recording, and I got pushed in to do the albums with them, record with them, and they would record incredibly quickly and make these records. And eventually they were like, they liked me, and I got on well with them. But it was weird working with them because their language is, and it sounds like the tape's running backwards. I was like, the tape's running backwards. No. So I was lucky. They flew me out to Iceland to work on the records out there in the studio as well. And we ended up having, at that time, the biggest selling album Iceland had ever had. So it was great just to be involved. And we're still friends to this day, and they're still doing concerts. And one of the guys, Gunnar Thordarson, is a composer, and Bo Bergen Hallison is a singer. He's still doing concerts this day. So I got to learn my trade with them. And slowly but surely I got thrown in. Then I got thrown in with a Chris de Burgh album that I was engineering, and Robin Cable was the producer. And I just got on with that. And then I met John Punter and Brian Ferry and all these different artists and producers, and worked with these different guys. And Mutt Lang came down and I worked on his session with them. So I was blessed, And then I worked with the Who on Who by Numbers. And Glyn Johns was the producer. And when I think about it now, I was blessed to be in a place like that, because things, when those guys played music, when the Who kicked off or played a little, when they hit the pocket, that I call the pocket, it was just like an amazing moment. It was like seeing God. It's like Keith Moon had the biggest fuck off drum kit in the world, and Glyn Johns had this way of miking drums, which worked perfectly. It still does, where you position 287s over the top and from the side in a certain way, equidistant from the snare drum, and put a microphone on the bass drum. Well, Keith Moon had I think he had 16 tom-toms, double wrapped all the way around like this, and he'd stand up and hit them all like that. He'd go, and I remember Pete Townsend saying to Glyn, "Do you think we could put a microphone on the snare, Glyn?" And Glyn's going, "No, that's not the way I do it." He goes, "Please, can we just put a microphone on this?" He finally talked him into it, and he put the microphone on the snare. And there were occasions that we had, they used to have a bar at the end of the studio, and I was the T-boy, I was just like the dirt on. I think Pete Townsend called me a worm one time. Which
Really?
Yeah, he called me a worm, which I thought was kind of nice of him, really. But I went. They had a bar at the end of the studio, and it's still talked about to this day. And I went down the end of the bar, and I got a drink, to the end of the studio rather, and got a drink. And I was walking back, and Pete Townsend was there with Dave Edmunds, and they were both jamming away on acoustic guitars. And they had the guitar cases sitting there opening on the floor, and they were jamming away. And I walked up, and I was looking at them, and I got 2p out of my pocket, and I threw it in Pete Townsend's guitar case and walked off. And he went, "You cheeky little cunt." I was so lucky not to get fired. Sorry about the C word. But that's what he said. I was so privileged as well to sit in the control room at the end of the day and listen to Pete Townsend ruminating with Roger and Keith and the Ox, and then all those guys just talking about life in general. And there's me sitting there going, I was a pig in shit. It was incredible. I was so lucky. And then bit by bit, I met all these different people. Kenny Laguna came down, brought Joan Jett in. I started working with Joni and Kenny, and we did a lot of stuff for Berserkly Records, which was out of Berkeley in California, with Jonathan Richmond, Greg Kinn, the Rubinoos, all these kind of bands, and they all came through at different times. Neil Young came through, and we worked on his session. But then I got to work with Kenny and Richie Cordell, and fortunately for me, Kenny was like a kind of guy that he said that at one point in his life he was loading boxes and he just wanted to get back to making records. And Kenny was in Tommy James and the Shondells. He was a keyboard player. So he found Joni, and he believed so much in Joni that he put everything on the block for Joni. He'd do it. See, this was it. This was his girl. And because he had a relationship with the studio, and the Who liked him, and Bill Curbishley liked him, he made a good deal with the studio. And I was fortunate enough to be the engineer. And Kenny and I had already worked on other records, punk records before that. And so we worked together on the Bad Reputation album. And that was, in retrospect, that was probably I was very, very lucky that I got the chance to work with Kenny, who was an amazing producer, and Richie Cordell, who was a crazy dude, very crazy dude. But Richie was the first dude that said to me, "Look, I want the bass drum to sound like this. Yeah. And I want the tom-toms to go, I don't want them ringing, I don't want this." So it was like, wow, how do we do that? And I had to think about how we did it. And so we brought in different levels of padding and different ways of miking things to try and get what he wanted. He had this vision of the sound. And we got pretty close to it, I think. I think they got it probably better on the I Love Rock and Roll album, which Glenn Kolotkin did. And he was a fine engineer too. But I do remember Richie was kind of in a world of his own, and he didn't really get a lot of stuff sometimes. He didn't listen to a lot of other music, albeit that he'd written Moni and I Think We're Alone Now. And I remember sitting in the studio one day, and Joni, we're doing Bad Reputation, and she's singing, "I don't give a damn about my bad reputation." And Kenny goes, "I got this idea." He says, "Why don't you go, I don't give a damn about my bad reputation." And she said, "Don't be fucking stupid." And Richie went, "That's a fucking amazing idea. That's the best thing I ever heard. You go, you my generation, my reputation." And I'm like, oh God. And Joni's freaking out. "We can't do that. This is the fucking Mark." She said, "Mark, tell Richie that's a Who song, please." I was like, I'm not sure that it is, Joni. And she's going, "You fucking idiots, you bastards." Richie had never heard the song. And of course, it all ended up laughing, and but there was a moment there where it was just like, how could you not know that song, Richie? But that was typical of Richie Cordell. He was a crazy fucker. And then, fortunately, I met the wonderful Judas Priest.
Wow.
And they came in. I was a rookie, really. And it was their first album on CBS, and Roger Glover, they had a different guy producing it to start with. He lasted about 10 minutes. They got rid of him. Then Roger Glover came in, and we had loads of microphones all over the kit. Simon Phillips was the drummer on that record. And Roger was like, get rid of all those microphones. There's too many microphones. Who wanted, so it all changed. It was all changed. And we made the album Sin After Sin, which, to this day, people still talk to me about it. And funnily enough, it was Whit Crane from Ugly Kid Joe. It was like it was an album that he asked me about when we were talking about me working with them. And he kind of asked me a trick. He said he asked me a trick question, and I think the trick question was, "What do you think of it?" Because I don't think the record sounded particularly good, if you really, in real honesty. Because I didn't know what I was doing. I was just seat of the pants. But I got away with it. I got through it, and it ended up doing all right, and it was in the charts, and I was really happy. I had a record in the charts now, And my parents going, "Oh, maybe he's going to be all right, this kid. Maybe he'll get there." But Rampart was incredible because then they did Tommy, and I have to just say this about it. I don't want to bang on about Rampart too much, but it was such an incredible place because they did Tommy, and when they were doing Who by Numbers, Mooney came in and he was playing away on this song, drumming like mad, and when those guys hit that pocket, it sounded like nothing you'd ever heard before. It just was so fucking good. And they were all playing live, and Roger was singing. It's all boom. And it sounded incredible. And this one particular day, we're all sitting there, and this is gospel truth as well. This fully dressed clown walked into the control room. He must have been 6'4", fully dressed clown. I mean, shoes like big like this, big old red nose, the fucking lot. And he came in and he flopped into the room like that. And Mooney saw him. And Mooney was stopped mid-song, threw his kick deck, threw his sticks down, ran in the control room, jumped on the clown, and they just started punching each other and rolling each other on the floor. And it turned out to be Oliver Reed. So Oliver Reed and him and Mooney were best friends. And they just rolled around on the floor fighting for 20 minutes. And
brilliant.
Then you see Jack Nicholson walk through. And Margaret came there. They always do voice bits, And then Paul McCartney walked by, and Rick Wakeman walked by, and Eric Clapton walked by. And you go, it was like this. I was like, oh my God, look at these people. These are like the stars of the world. It was incredible. Keith Richards came down and jammed on that Alexis Corner album. And Stevie Marriott tried to talk him into leaving the Stones to join Humble Pie. Keith was like, I don't think so. No, not really. He's like, do another line. No, I'm not doing it. So, yeah, amazing place. And I was blessed to be able to get in there and work. And that just wouldn't happen these days. You would never get experience, And then from there, obviously, after when the studio closed, I had to just make my own way and do whatever I could do. And Laguna, bless him, he gave me a bit of a leg up, and I got to go to America and produce a band called the Iron City House Rockers for MCA, and that was really my first production on my own. And then shortly after that, we went, and that's about the time that I ended up. A few years later, we was probably by then going to do Defenders of the Faith with Tom Allen as the producer. I was the engineer, and we did that in Ibiza because Dave Holland, the drummer, had a studio in. He had a partnership of this studio in Ibiza.
Yeah.
So we all flew out there, but they were writing the songs as we went along. It wasn't like, here we are, we're in the studio, here's all the songs. It was like, we better write some songs now, we're in the studio. So Glenn would sit down working on songs, and KK and Rob would sit and work on songs, and we'd work our way through it bit by bit by bit. And when they finally got a song together, they say, right, we've got the song, and we'd they'd go downstairs, and it was a strange kind of process, but there wasn't the best vibe in the world between Dave Holland, the drummer, and the rest of the band. So they just wanted to get a drum track down and go off and write another song. So that we would actually just record like 2 tracks of drums literally a stereo pair of drums, and put the rough guitars down. And once they got their arrangement right, they go, right, that's it, we're off. And then they'd say to me and Tom, okay, now you guys get on with the drums. So then we'd actually do the real drums. So we'd record the real drums there while they went off and wrote some more songs. And when we had the real drums done, which was kind of a blessing because it gave us a chance to hone in a little bit more on the tones and the performance. And so Dave was playing along to his original track. That was his guide, which was kind of interesting because he had to go with the flow of the tracks as well. He had to feel it still the same, which he managed to do. And then the boys would come down and they would put guitars on it and it would grow a bit like that. And every song was like, it would grow a little bit by little bit. And then when we did, then one day KK got run over. We were going across the road for a drink, sober as judges we were. We going across this road and this car came from nowhere and just smacked him. He went down the road like 80 yards, bounced off the bonnet, landed in the middle of the road. And I was like, oh no, and Glenn was in the bar across the road. And I remember, I ran in the bar, I said, Glenn, KK's been hit by a car. The cab driver stopped and Glenn ran out and we're standing there and Glenn, I don't never understand why he did this. He went up to this driver and he put his arms around and he picked him up like that, squeezed him, picked him up like that and threw him on the ground and says, don't ever do that again. And I'm like, what are you doing? It's just like, Glenn's a trip. Anyway, we got KK to hospital and he got all bandaged up. Fortunately, nothing was broken. And the next day he was laying in the bath trying to get the plaster off his leg that they're stuck to the hairs on his leg, which is painful. But 2 days later, he was sitting there with Rob writing Love Bites, and I walked in the room. I was lucky enough to be, and I just hear the riff, and love bites me and bites me.
Yeah.
In the bed. And he just made the words up there and then. And I'm like, these guys are fucking great. These guys are serious talent. They were so good. And because there's that saying that you can't soar with the eagles if you work with turkeys. And to be honest, I never worked with not many turkeys, thank God. And then, and Tom had all these great ideas. So the beginning of Love Bites, I don't know if you know the song that starts with this bass. And there was a big chamber, not a chamber, like just a big concrete room. So he said, let's put the bass in there and we'll just put a microphone up there and then we'll record it in there. And I go, great, let's do that. So we do. And all of a sudden we hear, and the gardener's walking by the end of the room going, whistling away to Manuela. Say, Manuela, can you stop whistling for a minute? We're recording the bass. And then he said, yeah. But Tom was amazing with Rob because he's so great with vocals. And we had a great time there and we did all the backing tracks and then we went to Florida to do all the rest of it, all the guitars. And then we'd done most of the bass and we'd done some guitars. And then we went to Florida and finished it all off at a studio there. And the one thing that was amazing about that, at the time, Def Leppard was huge. And we would kind of listen to that and everyone was like, oh, listen to the way their drums sounded. Blah, blah. And I wasn't really as au fait as I probably should have been. And I wasn't 100% aware of how you could sample a snare drum with an AMS and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Which I should have known. It would have saved us a lot of time in a way, albeit that, that has no touch sensitivity or feel to it. So it can spoil a record. So what we did when we got to Florida, there was a guy called Seth, I think his name was. And he had this light that would flash. And when the light flashed, in the studio, you could make the light flash, and when the light flashed, this metal arm went like that. And me and Tom are looking at each other, and we think, if we put a drumstick in that metal hand and put a snare drum underneath, I wonder what it'll sound like, and then trigger the light from the snare drum that's on tape and see what kind of sound we get. So we did it, and all of a sudden this metal thing went. And I was like, wow, look. And we tuned the snare drum and we controlled the sound, had it all under control. It was like, so then we put a glove on the metal hand. You had to have a glove, a metal hand, you had to have a glove. So it was like, and we were like, this is incredible, this is great. But then if it went, the hand couldn't cope, So we had to bust our way around that. And we used this snare drum and mixed it in with the other snare drum, the original snare drum, in such a way that it didn't affect the feel of anything. It just added a tone to it, but it was it was stupid of me, really, because we could have done it with an AMS in about 20 minutes. I think we spent about 3 days doing that. Me and Tom, we had a laugh doing it. But Tom was great. Tom was always coming up with great ideas, sounds and stuff, you know, dragging axes around in the night with microphones stuck on them, making all kinds of weird noises and putting them into the record and keying things off of hi-hats. I used to love using key picks and keying things from them, you know, controlling sounds and doing things like that, which was all good. And I was lucky because that led to me being able to produce all these other bands, you know, and I just went from there. I'm kind of prattling on a bit, aren't I? I'm sorry.
No, mate, it's great. Don't apologize. It's amazing. I really want to find out. Okay, so that era in the 80s. So tell us about the period that you were with. Let's have a think. So like Anthrax, the period that I know Metal Church was before that. So maybe tell us about, you know, some of the stuff with Metal Church, what you were doing with those guys.
Metal Church boys, wow. What a bunch of lovely guys, you know. Unbelievable, fantastic guys. I was blessed to be able to go and work with them. And Terry Date had worked on their first album, and Terry engineered and worked with me on their second album. And obviously Terry went on to be, you know, a well-renowned producer in his own right. And we did it at a little studio in Seattle. And we went into pre-production and just worked on songs. You know, I kind of enjoy the pre-production side of things because it gives me a chance to learn the songs backwards. And I would always know if I, you know, in a case like that, I knew the song from the beginning to the end. I knew the drum fills, I knew the changes, I knew everything about every song. And I would write it all down, and but then at the same time, I would also go, well, what about if we tried going into it like that, or if we tried doing this like that? And they were very accepting of those ideas. And so they would, they would try all those ideas. So we immediately, it's very important when you're a producer that you earn the trust of the people you're working with, and that they like you and they feel comfortable, because you know this is their big moment. This is the thing that they've been waiting for, as it was for me. Don't get me wrong. This is something they'd all been waiting for all their lives. This was their art. This was their love. This is everything in the world to them. And that's the beauty of working with bands and musicians, because this is their 100 meters. This is their FA Cup final, you know, whatever you want to call it, but they're there and they're on it. You know, they're on it. They want to be the best. And I love that, you know, that attitude of conscientiousness that you don't find in normal life. So I was very, very happy, and I'm still friends with those guys to this day. So I remember coming to the rehearsal studio one day, and I heard them working on a song, and I didn't walk in. I just let them get on with it. It was a song called Start the Fire. And when I walked in after they got it right, I was like, that's fucking great, you guys. And they were like, yeah, it's called Start the Fire. And they'd written it because they were buzzed, you know, they were in the right mood. They were really happy to do it. And so we obviously went in the studio and recorded everything. And there was one song called Method to My Madness. And I was, you know, I'm not the kind of guy to say, oh, that's rubbish or da da da. Who am I to say anything? But I was like, are you sure about the lyrics? And they were like, well, have you got something better? And I had some lyrics that I'd written from a long time ago, from something that I was working on, a private thing. And I gave them those lyrics, and they were like, yeah, we love these lyrics, we'll use them. And I was like, you don't have to use my lyrics, trust me, you know. I had to write a lot of lyrics for Udo and the singer from Accept, because when Udo made his albums, they couldn't speak English, so I wrote all the lyrics for those albums. So I could write lyrics, but I was honored that they decided to use my lyrics, and I was very happy that they did it. The one thing I did on that record that I think was a mistake in retrospect was use the AMS snare drum, because the snare drum doesn't have feel and doesn't have, you know, if the snare drums hit, if it goes bang, if you use an AMS, it goes bang, 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 and you lose the subtlety of it.
Transients, the transients in the snare,
It goes, and that's since been resolved with people that use samples and that. But I would never do that again. And I regretted that I did that on that record. It did all right. It did well, and we remained friends forever. And I've got pictures of them when they came to London and visited us, and we all had dinner together, and they met my wife and hung out, and we all got on great. And Dave Wayne was an amazing singer, and it was very sad that he died. God rest his soul, because he was those guys were a killer band. They were a killer band. Kurt Vanderhoof the drummer Kirk, he was great, and Craig Wells, amazing, and Duke Erickson. I just got a message from him. He's just the bass player. He's just retired and gone fishing. I'm like, good for you, dude.
Good man.
Yeah. But they were great guys, and we had a ball of a time making that record. It's so all the records that I've been involved in, that well, I can't say all, but the majority of the records that I've been involved, there's been great things happen. There's been great friends made, and there's been great times had that you hold dear to you for the rest of your life. You know, and I'm so lucky to have actually been able to witness that. You know, because I kind of went out on a limb as a kid and thought, well, I'm just going to do this and see what happens. My kids are like that with me now. They go, my kid Tommy's going, I'm going to go and be the world champion boxer. And Molly's going to go, I'm going to be the biggest entrepreneur ever. And I'm like, go kids, go.
Yeah.
Go and do it. I'm more than happy for you. You know, I'm very pleased that they've got that attitude. So the Metal Church record, there was a song on it called Watch Children Pray that did quite well. And Dave sung the shit out of it. And the drummer could sing harmonies and background vocals because he'd been in choir once. And I got him singing all these background vocals and harmonies and stuff. So it was good. You know, I really enjoyed making that record. It was phenomenal. Fun. And then I made another record with them later, but they had a different singer and it wasn't quite the same thing anymore.
Completely. I'm sure you get that a few times with different bands that you work with. Have you ever had that before, where other bands where they've had new singers come in and they're going, it's not the same vibe? Is it really exciting the first time that you work with a brand new band? You're there learning about their vibe and how they tick. Is it really exciting? Is that probably, is the first album always the most exciting to you, would you say? Or
for me working on their first albums, I mean, that's kind of nerve-wracking as well, because you don't, with Anthrax, I wasn't sure what I was getting into. They're a very tight-knit bunch. They're very like this. You can't get in really. And I'd done some work on an Accept album called Russian Roulette in Germany, and then I did a couple of, the singer for that band, Uda, I did a couple of albums with him, which was good. That was in Germany at Dieter Dirk's studio, where I can't remember what they were called. The Scorpions, they were there a lot of the time. That was their studio. So they all hung around. We all hung around. So and for some reason, Johnny Z, Anthrax's manager at the time, had heard this stuff and thought I'd be a good fit for them. And so the first album I did with them was State of Euphoria. And those guys can play like you wouldn't believe. Again, I mean, they're ridiculous. But what you find as well, is such a strange thing that people probably don't realize. But Charlie, the drummer, writes the riffs, all the riffs, and obviously all the drums. And then Scott plays all the riffs, but Scott writes all the lyrics and the melodies. And Joey repeats the lyrics and the melodies and like that. And that's how that band works. This and kind of there was kind of a bit of tension because Joey didn't like singing it like that or didn't like doing it that way, but Scott said that's the way it had to be, and that's what they'd based their success on up until that time. So that wasn't going to change. And then you got Danny Spitz, who could play an unbelievable shredding guitar solo, and he'd say, like, he'd come to the studio, it was his time to do the solo. He didn't play on the rhythm tracks. He'd come and do and I'll come back to that bit. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of
No, it's cool, man.
So Danny would come to the studio and he'd have his solo and he'd play the solo and it would be ripping and he'd go, do you want me to double it? And I go, sure, why not? See what happens. So he'd double it and he'd go, boom. But that he couldn't do anything else. If you said to Danny, and no disrespect, but if you played a 3-chord structure and say, write a solo over that, or just play a solo, just go down, 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 or whatever, he couldn't do it. He had to go away and write it before he could play it. So you go, so you have to go away and write it before you can play it. So getting to know that kind of dynamic within the band, because there was schisms within the band, but those schisms were all part of the electricity that made them who they were, and Frankie, the bass player, was kind of the peacekeeper that he's a great bass player, a lovely guy, they're all lovely guys, but you could feel the kind of different tensions within the band, but that's what helped make the music the way it was. And then I was fortunate enough, there's a guy called Alex Perialis, who's my, second engineer with me, because I engineered it and produced it. What do you do when you produce Anthrax? You don't. All you got to do is try and keep the peace and get the shit on tape, before anybody kills anyone. They'll probably get.
I like that.
Probably get it in the ear for saying that, but it's pretty much true. And they were all great musicians. And just before we started State of Euphoria, which I think we did at a studio called Conway, at least, yeah, we did a lot of it there. Just before that, their warehouse had burnt down and all their kit gear had got burnt to shit. The only thing that was left was this one cabinet. And of course, when we came to get the guitar sounds, thank God it was the one guitar cabinet that lived through the fire that was Scott's favorite guitar amp, because he has a very distinctive sound. Now, you could put that guitar and that amp and that all them settings in anybody else's hands and it won't sound the same. You know, and that's a fact of life. But with put that in Scott's hands and him playing it, even if anyone was playing the same thing as Scott, it wouldn't sound the same. But when he plays it, it had a sound to it. And that was the sound. I said, oh, thank fuck, we've got the sound. So I knew that their guitar sound was very imperative to that band. And we would do 3 tracks. So you have one left, one right, and one up the middle. And that was the way they worked. And I'm like, good. It's like, that's what you want to do. That's fine. I often did 4 tracks. Sometimes I did 2 tracks. You just, do what you want. Just to get a fat sound or whatever, So that was quite an interesting way of doing it. And then I took it to Electric Lady to mix it in New York. And the band, they were all there. And I remember Gene Simmons from Kiss came down and was hanging out and having a game of ping pong with his good ping pong player, Gene Simmons.
No way.
So we mixed it there. But I'm a very, very, very lucky boy that there's a guy called Greg Calby who's a mastering engineer at Sterling Sound in New York. And Greg Calby's the greatest mastering engineer in the world. I don't care what anyone says. So apart from you, Rich, of course.
Oh, thanks, mate.
So I was fortunate in that I could go to Greg and play him stuff, and he'd say, you made this call out, blah blah blah. You need to do a little bit of this, because he could give me a vibe on where it was and where it wasn't at, and so I was lucky with that. And then he mastered the record, and I met Greg Calby because he did Tom Petty and all those guys, and we loved that. We flew from England with there was a guy called Sean Tyler who I did an album with. We flew to America just to get Greg Calby to master our record, and we all went as well. We all had to be there to meet Greg Calby and be great friends. And me and Greg became great friends, and we're still great friends to this day. And the one funny story about Greg Calby is that I went up to see him when I was in New York one time, and he was mastering something like that. It was like Diana Ross, something like that. It was a big female singer. I think it was Diana Ross. And he was doing the mastering, and I popped in to see him, and I used to smoke back in the day. And of course, when you master on vinyl, it scratches out it puts a groove in, and it's petroleum based. This whole thing is petroleum based. So all this fluff comes off it, and it goes into a waste bin by the side. And I'm standing there smoking, chatting to Greg, flicking my cigarette out in this bin, and then all of a sudden it just went like that. The fucking thing went through the sky like that. Calby was like lightning. He grabbed it, ran out the back door, turned it upside down on the fire escape, and it stopped. But in that time that it took him to do that, the whole of the 9th floor of this fucking building in New York was full of smoke. And then the alarms went off, and then the fucking fire brigade arrived, come charging up the stairs with their axes. And I'm like, oh, Jesus, what have I done? And we managed to say, oh, this, that, and the other, and they left, and we got away. And the next time I arrived at Sterling Sound, there were all these photographs on the wall, and it said, the day the London arsonist struck. And it shows you the picture of all these guys coming in with the choppers and stuff. And I was like, whoa, they could have burnt the whole place down. But Calby was like lightning. And he's remained a great friend ever since. We still talk quite often. So I'm lucky to have him, because I can send him stuff, and he'll go, if you're in a room mixing and you're not quite sure of what you're getting, you're up against it straight away. You're in real trouble. Your chances of getting anywhere are negligible. And there was a room at Devonshire in North Hollywood where Weather Report had worked, and it was the best mixing room I ever worked in. It's just, I don't know why or how, but it made you make the record sound great. And when you walked out of there, it sounded better than it sounded great. It was like the Electric Love Hogs album I did just sounded, which was John Feldman was the singer of Electric Love Hogs.
Yeah.
And Tommy Lee worked on it with me. Good lad, Tommy. And it just sounded incredible. You know, it was a great room to work in. But if, like, I've got speakers and everything in this room here I'm in now that you can't see, and I've got boards and blah blah blah, and I mixed Ugly Kid Joe's new album, which is coming out shortly, on Logic in this room, you know, and I just sat here with Logic and learned it and did it. But I don't treat Logic. I treat Logic like a tape recorder with some effects on it. You know, to me, that's what it is. I'm not a great fan of putting things on the grid and making things correct all the time, because that's not what it's about for me. So, you know, I kind of dart about a lot with what I'm talking about. I hope that's all right.
No, keep going, man. This is great.
I kind of, when the new Ugly Kid Joe record we did in El Paso, in a studio called Sonic. Oh, what's it called? Anyway, it's in El Paso, and it's a great studio. It's like ridiculous. The guy that owns it's a pecan farm, but he's got like 5 rooms there, and they've all got like vintage gear in, like you would not believe, like Neve boards, mint, absolutely mint. And then there's guitars lying around that are unbelievable guitars, 1960 Strat and 1975 Gibson that so and so had, and blah 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 blah. So we went there to make the record, and I just used the Pro Tools as a tape machine. I'm like, I don't, you know, it saves a lot of money on tape for a start, but I don't want it. I don't want it on the grid. I was like, no click. I don't want click. What's the point of having a drummer if you're going to put a click? You're just taking an ingredient out of the cake. You know, it's like, can you imagine Keith Moon playing to a click, or Charlie Watts? But it would just, all of a sudden you'd have nothing, you know, and I'm not a fan of that. Now, if some people, don't get me wrong, I think the fact that you can make a record in your bedroom is great for lots and lots of people. But as soon as you take that one ingredient away, you start taking other ingredients away. You start moving things around and putting things on. They talk to me about a grid. I'm like, what the fuck's a grid? What are you talking about, the grid? And then all of a sudden I went, oh, the grid. And I walked in the room one day, and one of the assistant engineers was moving things. What are you doing? He said, I'm just putting it on the grid. I said, get it off the fucking grid. I don't want it on the grid. I'd play to a click if I want it on the grid. Get it off the grid. So, you know, I wouldn't, no, I don't. The whole thing about a band and the moment that they capture the magic, when the drummer and the bass player and the guitar players all hit that pocket, and the singer has a bearing on that as well, because his timing affects the way that it flows. When those all come together during the initial recording, you get something that nobody else in the world could do. Nobody in the whole wide world. It's like watching the Liverpool front line, you know, for argument's sake, you know, when Sonny and Manny and blah blah blah, and they all pass and they all just hit this moment. No one can touch it. And you go, whoa. And I saw it, you know, and I heard it I heard it with The Who. And when they hit that moment, you'd be listening going, this ain't sounding right. This ain't sounding right. Especially, I would do it personally. I remember doing it with Bow Wow Wow, with I Want Candy. I'm going, it's not sounding right. It's not sounding right. And then all of a sudden they played it right. And the world changes. The sound of the instruments, the drum sound changes when the drummer is in the pocket with everybody else. This magical thing happens. Now, I don't know. You cannot define that. And I don't give a fuck what anybody says. All the best music in the world is made like that. All the orchestras in the world that make their music, they make it like that. All the best music, all the greatest paintings in the world are done not by numbers. You know, my nan painted by numbers. You know, it's not a science. It's production shouldn't be considered to be like a computer science, which I know you can get a degree in sound record producer now. Well, actually, you're not. You're a computer operator. You know, I don't mean that disrespectfully whatsoever. But you know, if I give you a snare drum and a microphone, and you go in that room, can you make that snare drum sound good? And I know kids go and do computer courses and learn how to become a producer, and they go, well, I don't know how to do that. And I know you don't know how to do it, and I wouldn't know how to do it if I was doing it the way you did it.
You're right.
I wouldn't know how to make a snare drum sound this way or that way, or you know. And experience teaches you, if a snare drum's not sounding right, get rid of the fucking snare drum. Get another snare drum in straight away. Don't sit there fucking around with it for 4 hours and wasting money. Just get 5 snare drums, get one that sounds nearest, and then work on that. And that's, you know, and I learned, or I was always learning. I learned from Tommy Lee about drum sounds with Bobby, the drummer from Electric Love Hogs, you know. And again, you know, we'd get a sound on those drums. Tommy would go out and play them, sound completely different from when Bobby was playing them, just completely different. You know, they both had their own way, but they would sound different whoever hit it. And so I learned little tricks from Tommy about the drums, you know. And there's a trick where you can, and people probably know all this anyway, where you mic the top of the tom-tom and you mic the bottom of the tom-tom as well with the same kind of microphone, but you flick the phase on the one that's underneath. And you EQ it the same as you EQ the one underneath, and you just fade it in a little bit, and it gives it this big fat depth in there. Boom! It makes a warm, fat bass snare drum or tom-tom. You know, and different ways of recording the bass drum. Maybe instead of putting a pillow in it, put torn up newspaper in there, and all these different things to make. So you learn all these tricks. And is it on what kind of bit of flooring is it on, and what's in the room that's making it sound like this, or making. So you can tell, you can learn just from all of your experience over the years how to make drums sound good in a particular, and you can tell when you walk in a room if they're going to sound good or not anyway. And then you get compression in a room as well. If a room's too small and the sound can't go anywhere, it can't breathe, you know, and so you can't get a good sound. And so, you know, you just learn all these things as you go along. So, and then going back to State of Euphoria, that record did good. And then I was fortunate for them to come and asked me to do the next album as well, and which I did, which led to us doing Attack of the Killer Bees. Now, Attack of the Killer Bees we did that at the end of the night each day. At the end of the day, we go, right, let's do a song, a Killer Bees song. Go, okay, so we just pick any old song and we'd record it in 10 minutes, literally. Do 10 minutes, boom, done. And then we do another one, and we added them all up until we had that whole until we had the whole album, Killer Bees album, and of course we had Bring the Noise on there as well, which Chuck D was meant to sing on it, but Chuck D never came to the studio, and Charlie Benanti, in his wizardry, had a vocal somehow of Bring the Noise, and Scott sang part of it too, and we flew it in bit by bit from tape, fly it in a bit here, bit there, because we used to fly things in on tape all the time. Yeah, because we didn't have. Now that's a great advantage with the Pro Tools, obviously. But the only trouble with that again is someone will go, "Oh, I sang the chorus once, put it on all the other choruses." You go, but that's not the idea. You sing in a song here. Don't just sing one bit. You might sing the next chorus with a different feel, a different vibe. So that bit I don't like about it. You know, where you use it. But there were times when, for example, on Infectious Grooves record that I did. Robert Trujillo, Mike Muir, all the gang, great bunch of guys. It's a great record. We were working at Devonshire, and Ozzy was in at the same time, and we kind of said to Ozzy, do you fancy singing on this song? And and it was called Therapy. It was perfect for Ozzy. And Ozzy came in, and he had a beer in this hand and a cigarette in this hand, and he said, well, what's this song all about then, boys? What's it about? And go, this is the bit you've got to go, therapy. And he's going, yeah, all right. And you listen to it. Yeah, he says, I like it. It's good. It's really good. I'll just do it. So he'd go out, but he had bangles on his arms. He had like 50 bangles on both arms. Yeah. And he always put his hands up to his head like that when he was singing. He's shaking like this. And he'd go, all the bangles. And I was like, I ain't asking him to take the bangles off. I'll work it out with a Keypex later. Don't worry about that. We can make that work. So the point I was going to say was that then an engineer that I was working with said, I've got bad news. I went, what are you saying? He said, I wiped Ozzy's vocal in the second chorus. And I was like, my immediate reaction was like, oh, fucking hell, Ozzy Osbourne, you don't wipe Ozzy Osbourne's vocal. Albeit that I've made some mistakes in my time, don't get me wrong. And I was like, okay, but my immediate reaction is, how do I fix this? How do I get around this? So I go to the first chorus, and as we didn't have flying in machines then, or we could have put a bit of it in an AMS, but only 1.4 seconds or something. So I recorded it on a 1/2-inch tape, and then I would work out by the beats. I'd say, right, I'll put it 4 bars before, give the tape machine time to catch up, and hit the play button at the right moment while the 24 track's going, and fly it in from the 1/2-inch into the chorus. Now, first time, I said, record it. It might go in first time. You might get it first time. Occasionally you did. And it was like, yes, God's here. And sometimes it didn't. And you just had to You go, right, I know I was a little bit late there, so you'd move it a little bit this way, a little bit that way. And so you could save the day, basically. And that's how we saved the day. With the Electric Love Hogs, we flew in. They did all these brilliant vocals on the first chorus. And when I came to mix it, it was a song that Tommy produced on his own because my back had been out and one thing and another. And I was like, why didn't you put the vocals on all the other choruses? And they went, oh, do you think we should have? And I was like, fucking right, you should have. So we said, oh, what are we going to do? Well, these were like fucking huge vocal harmonies on a song. Well, I don't remember what it's called. Anyway, Sitting Pretty. And so I said, well, we'll fly them in. So we flew them in, all by tape, flew them in. And I learned this from, working with Tom Allen and other people, that you could do all these sorts of things, just make things happen. And sometimes things would happen and it was magical. And you just go, oh, I'll just keep that. That's great. How did that happen? I remember Rocky George from Suicidal playing a solo. And I say, you made a bit of a fuck up there, Rocky. And he said, I know I did. He says, but I could never fuck it up like that again. And I'm like, let's keep it. He goes, yeah. And that was it. Nobody else noticed. It was a minor thing. That was the attitude, and that kind of attitude I like. I think that what Tim Palmer was saying about mistakes and all that was very valid. And the thing that blew me away about Tim Palmer was that he had the balls to put drums on a U2 record. I was like, whoa, man, how did you have the balls to do that? And then come back and go, yeah, we love that, without even flinching. And I'm like, that's great. That's killer.
Yeah.
That's what we used to do, stuff like that, I used to sing on all the records I worked on. I always sing background vocals or play drumsticks on a piece of newspaper and make some percussion sounds or play a fucking stupid guitar bit or do something on all of. I always wanted to put something on all the records I worked on, just for the hell of it. So
but you're taking a risk.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. Well, why not? That was it. The thing is, there's no rules. There's no rules, and there shouldn't be any rules. And so at that time, I was doing a lot of work out of Devonshire in Los Angeles, and we used to use A&M as well, and Cherokee and Conway. And there's a funny story about Conway, but I probably shouldn't tell you it, so I won't. I think I've got a bit of deja vu about telling this story before, so maybe I shouldn't tell it.
Okay.
But it was about a pudendum plant. That's all I can tell you, which was a very special plant. Anyway, so I was working in all these different studios there and working on lots of different projects. And the Electric Love Hogs was about the same time as Ugly Kid Joe were kicking off. And I went and saw Ugly Kids playing at a club down in. I Hate Everything About You was a hit by then. And I went and saw them at this club. They'd already come and met with me and talked about me doing the next record, which obviously was quite an exciting thing to get involved with, especially with a band that you could see was doing really, really well. They're just blowing up out of the blue. And their first video, and Whip, a Californian beach dude, the girls just loved him, and he could sing like a bird, and they all looked great. They could all play, and they had a great attitude. So I'd seen them in the club and that, and I was like, yeah, these guys are great. I love them. They're really good. And I was fortunate enough then to be able to go on and work on America's Least Wanted, which we did at Devonshire Studios. And they were such Priest fans, they loved Judas Priest to pieces. And so I said, well, why don't we get Rob Halford to sing on the record? He could sing on one of the songs. They're like, no fucking way. And I'm, yeah. They said, no way. There's no way. I said, oh, let me call Rob and we'll see what happens. And one thing led to another, and Rob turned up and sang on Goddamn Devil, and Whip was there going, sing it like this, sing it like that. And Rob's going, Goddamn Devil. And it was fucking incredible, it was just jumping up and down. It was so happy. And there it was, that record was made. And then Whit sang Cats in the Cradle as a guide vocal in a little tiny room, smaller than this room, a tiny room. And Klaus was on acoustic guitar in the same room as him, and they were there. But the vocal was just, a couple of girls turned up in the control room, and Whit just fucking sang it like that, and he got it. It was like bang, it was just the vocal. And when we came to, so let's try and do another one. We never got near it. So that was the vocal. And the doctor then, what about all the leakage on the guitar? So who gives a shit? If anybody ever hears it, they'll probably enjoy it. They'll never hear it. It won't matter. They'll never know. Who gives a fuck? So that was the vocal on that, and those moments that you get like that are incredible. And I remember when we finished, just go back quickly to Infectious Grooves. We finished the album, And Ozzy came in to listen to the mix of Therapy, and he was like, "This is fucking great. This is great." And he was jumping up and down, and he goes, "Get up, you lot, get up!" And everybody had to get up and dance with him. We all danced like this. And then he leaned over and he grabbed Mike Muir and he kissed him. And I thought, "Fucking hell!" And he's probably the only bloke in the world that could have kissed Mike Muir and got away with it. You know, because Mike Muir's like, you know,
Huge guy.
yeah. So that, you know, moments like that were just electric. And it was Mike's birthday that day as well, I think. So he said, "This is the best birthday ever," you know. And he thought up Sarsipius. I don't know if you've heard Infectious Groove's record, The Plague That Makes Your Booty Move, where it's got this guy comes in and this like lizard comes in. "What's going on in here? Closed session, closed session." Mike just came up with all that shit out of the blue. And everyone just went with it. Like, record that bit, record. And then we just threw it all in between, you know, put it in different places. And it made the record. It actually helped the record so much. It was just like, why not? Let's just do that. Let's do it. You can do what you want. There are no rules, and there should be no rules. And that's what, you know, that time and making those records was so special for me. And at 1992, the Ugly Kid Joe thing, it was Rodney King had just been, you know, the Rodney King thing happened in Los Angeles. There were riots everywhere. We had to get back from the studio, being in by 7 o'clock. There were bullet holes in the studio wall where things have been going on outside. And we go, "Fuck, where did that happen from?" You know, that's just happened while we've been working. You didn't think of that. You just could have died any minute, I guess. But brilliant times, you know. And the A&R man came up to me and he says to me, he says, "Mark," he said, "his dad had died. His dad had just died." And was like, "Sorry about your dad now." And he came to the studio. He said, "Yeah, it's bad." He said, "It's sad, very sad." I said, "Well, we're really sorry." He said, "I just want to say something." He said, "I looked in my dad's coffin to say goodbye to him, and I said to him, 'Dad, don't let Dodson fuck this record up.'" And I was like, "Thanks a lot, mate. Thanks a fucking lot. It's just what I want to hear." A little bit more pressure. But to give them their due, when I first started working with them, they gave me I got a great big bag full of stuff that you'd wear at the beach, hats and beach balls and lilos and flip flops and all that. And it just said on it, said, "This is all the outboard gear you're going to need on this record." And I was like, that's a good attitude.
That's great.
Bobby Carlton and all these other guys who were great A&R guys. You know, we had great times, all good stuff. But that kind of leads me to talking about probably, I mean, that all these bands are holding, you know, very dear to my heart. But I did the Nixons there as well. They were a great band. We had a hit with a song called Sister. But Suicidal Tendencies for me was probably the most rewarding record I have ever made for lots of different reasons. You know, and I could sit and talk about those guys forever. But when I first, they had an English manager, and I got the opportunity to go out and talk to them. I heard their earlier records like Join the Army and all that, and War Inside My Head and stuff. And you go, these guys, I just thought, wow, these guys, there's something going on here that's just so fucking, you couldn't touch it. It was just unbelievable, so exciting. And I got to fly to Los Angeles and hang out and go to a rehearsal. And I walked into a rehearsal room, which was a garage. And it was all, everything was set up in there. And there's these fucking guys with the fucking bandanas on like this. And, you know, then there's not a word spoken, not a word. So I go in, and this guy comes and sits down next to me like this. And they go, and they start playing, and they play one song, and they go, and just fucking roar through this song, and you go, fucking hell. And then they'd stop, and one of them would play one note, and they knew what the next song was, and they'd do the next song, and they did that for like 45 minutes. And I just sat there and I was going, fucking hell, these guys are ridiculous. Anyway, me and the guy that sitting next to me, which transpired to be Mike Muir, and I just, you know, he had his hair was all down, he didn't have his bandana on, I didn't recognize him, and he would come. And I said, that was a fucking roller coaster, wasn't it? And he goes, yeah, what do you think? I said, it's fucking ridiculous. It's so good. It's ridiculous. And then I still wasn't given the job. They didn't go, right, well, you can do the record. And Mike said, let's go out for lunch. So I go, okay. So we went to a place on Sunset Strip, and we're having lunch. And just me and him and a few other people in the restaurant. And I got up to have a piss or something, and I came back. And the waiter came over and he said, those two girls over there, they've just sent you guys over a couple of drinks. They just want you to have a couple of drinks to say hi and that. And I was like, I'm not interested. I'm here talking, this guy about this record. We're talking about family and music and all the things that really matter in life. And I swear to God that Mike Muir set that up to see where my head was at. Now, I might be wrong, but I didn't think it at the time, but I thought later, he's probably waiting to see what kind of, am I a guy that's come from London that just wants to have a fucking big party in LA, or am I here? Am I serious? Anyway, so then we went on to do How Will I Laugh Tomorrow If I Can't Even Smile Today with Trip at the Brain and all that stuff on there. And I was just fucking, when he, there's one bit in Trip at the Brain where he just goes off on one vocally, and he just goes off in it. When he did it, I was like, what the fuck? That was so great. Because, Mike just makes his vocal work with the music, and his passion and his love for the music is so undeniable. It is so pure and strong. And he's such an honest kind of man that I just fucking loved every bit of it. The band were amazing, and then, of course, Lights, Camera, Revolution came along, and Robert Trujillo walks in the door, the lizard boy.
Oh, great bassist.
Oh, fucking, what a bloke, you know what I mean? What a darling geezer. He'd been carrying bricks on the building site 2 weeks earlier, and then he walks in to play bass on this stuff. And Mike was like, make him slap all the time, make him slap the bass because it sounds great. And like Robert said, he said, we were the first guys to play 5-string on a metal band. Do you know that? We were the first ones to be slapping this, and he'd slap the bass, and he'd have to stop every 20 minutes, put his arm in hot water because his muscles were cramping up. And then he'd come back and slap it again, and bang it out like that, And it was great, and it came together. And Mike would sing. Mike would start a song by singing the last chorus first, and you go, okay, there's method to the madness, and build it up like that and go backwards and and build it bit like that. And we would work on all the vocals, and we would comp vocals and go backwards and forwards. So I would comp Rocky's solos because, Rocky could play 5 or 6 solos, and I would go, okay, and I'll work it out. And I go, I've got everything, I think, and put one together out of it. And when I listen to You Can't Bring Me Down, the intro and the guitar work on it, it's just like ridiculous. It's so good. It's phenomenal, what Rocky played there. But I also remember them being in the studio at one point, and we were getting nothing done. We were getting nowhere. And I'm like, we're getting nowhere here. And it was frustrating. I could feel the vibe wasn't right. The band they just weren't hitting it, they just weren't getting it right. And I said, let's get out of here. We just get out of the studio for 5 minutes. More often than not, if it's like 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night, you just go, let's go home, come back tomorrow, it'll work tomorrow. But this was early afternoon. So I go, okay, well, let's just get out. And I took the boys out. Mike didn't come. And I took them to a strip bar. Anyway, that was later called the Day of the Glistening Pussy.
Oh, no.
For obvious reasons. And that's the truth. What do I do? So we went back to the studio after about an hour and a half, and they recorded 5 songs like that. Bam, 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 bam. And they weren't faster than they were meant to be, which could have happened, but they were in the right pocket as well. So it just freed their minds and their spirits up to just go, phew, let's just enjoy ourselves. And they came back and we did that, and so and it worked. And I don't think they teach you that at BIM when you're learning how to be a producer.
Sure.
Maybe they do. Maybe they say, get them out, get them down the strip club. I don't know.
Can you imagine? No, maybe not. It's quite interesting because one of the moderators on our community, Justin, he's an incredible engineer, but he lectures at Salford University, where Pete, one of the moderators that you've met earlier on, goes as well. And I'm sure he's got a few things to say as well about, kind of what the kids, maybe we should introduce you, like what the kids actually learn, say kids, like young adults learn, but I'm sure they don't go to strip clubs, Mark. I'm sure you're definitely right on that one, mate.
It should be in the journal, in the, page 42 or so, page 69.
Yeah. Love it.
The experience of working with people and being in a studio with people, I sorely miss it all. I really do. And when I think about what I would like to do moving forward, I would love to find a band that were great. Just go walk in a room and hear a band play with a singer and everything just be there, like it was back in the day I mean, it happened every day almost back then. You know, you'd go see.
Yeah.
I know they still exist. Don't get me wrong, but I'd love to see a bunch of 18, 19-year-olds at the next Led Zeppelin or whatever come along, or just something that you go, wow. And not, my biggest concern would be that, you know, how would you ever market that? How would you be able to get all that out? But hopefully they would have, you know, I would worry about that. But my first thought would be, let's go make a record straight away. Let's just go and make a record for the hell of it and see what it's like.
Yeah.
I don't want to make a record where I've got the weight of the world on my shoulders, or worrying if it's going to be a hit or not be a hit, or what. You know, I don't care. I don't want to know what people. I want people to like it. I want people to like what I do, and I'm dead chuffed that sometimes I meet people and they go, I love that record you did. That I remember what was happening in my life at that time, and when that record came out, I was doing this or I was doing that, and then they go, and I was 8 years old, and I go, oh fuck me. I am old.
Exactly. It's amazing, and it's about a time in their history, though, isn't it? And their life.
Yeah, it is. It's a beautiful thing. And you know, I've got some. There's another guy, somebody who needs to be mentioned, and people need to, and I know everybody knows about this guy. There's a guy called Benji Webb and a band called Skindred. And Robert came to me and said, we're going to do a band called, we're going to do our own thing. And we didn't know what to call this band. And he said, look, I've got Brooks Wackerman playing drums. I've got me, and I've got Armand Sabaleko, who's a funkiest black bass player you ever did hear in your life. Fantastic bass player. Played on Paul Simon and everything, you know. Played 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover. You know, he's one of them kind of things. And him and Robert got together on a plane one time going to a bass conference, and they hit it off and they started jamming together. And the stuff they played was like fucking ridiculous. I mean, look, it's all bass guitar though. Then they put Brooks Wackerman on drums, and you've got this magical thing. But it just started, and it went and it went and it went, and it got wherever it got. And you go, right, well, what are you going to do with that? We said, we've got to find someone to sing on it. So he said to me, I found this guy called, we got Whit involved. Whit worked a bit on some of the stuff as well. And then he said, I've got this guy, Benji Webb, who sings, he was in Double. And he says, in Wales, do you want to go meet him and take a song? He said, he's heard a couple of songs and he said he's interested. So I drove over to Wales, and Benji sang on a couple of bits and pieces, and we hit it off. And we did this album together. It's all bass guitar. No guitars, just bass guitars. And because Armand's playing 8-string bass, you know, and playing stuff and he plays it as pop, all this weird shit, and Rob's going, and then Benji's singing over the top of it, and you go, and Benji would just make a lyric up as it went along. One song called The Sabbath, I Win. He put his daughter on his knee, got a microphone, and he was playing with his daughter while he was listening to it, and he just started singing. He sang the whole song in one go. He wrote the whole lyric and the song in one go, melody the lot. Benji Webb and Skindred, they are ridiculous. I mean, they're so good live, and Benji, what a front man. And another lovely, lovely geezer, you know. So he needs to be mentioned. Skindred should be huge.
It should. I remember them back in the 90s. No, not 90s, in the early noughties, should I say, sorry, when they were around. And we actually, I've seen them when did I see them? Yeah, I saw them actually about a year or so ago, just like before lockdown. And I'd listened to them over the years, but I went with my other half. And she's like, I love Skindred. I was talking about Skindred. She's like, absolutely love them. Saw them live, and I think, what venue was it? In Liverpool somewhere. And literally the whole place was electric. And the vibe, man, it's just literally the whole place. You know, I'm sure you've been in there as well, like watching Skindred, but it's like the place goes crazy. And everyone's just like in that one moment all together. It's just fantastic. But mate, they completely blew me away that night. And straight away, I was just like, right, I want to buy a hoodie. Where can I buy a hoodie from? You know, straight away, you know. So I've got this like zombie Skindred hoodie that I bought as well at the gig because I was just that impressed with them. They're a fantastic band, as you said, mate. Yeah, brilliant,
unbelievable. And you know and that's what I love about music. It's so special in that. My daughter Molly loves music too, and she was playing some music in this very room one day. The Molly Graffiti room. She was playing some music, and I was listening. I walked by the door, and I went, that sounds like Benji. And I said, who's that? And she said, I said, is that Benji Webb singing? And she went, yeah. And she said, how do you know that? I said, I know Benji. She went, you know Benji? I said, yeah, I know Benji. She said, he's fucking incredible. I said, yeah, I know. He's fucking great. I said, do you want to go and see him? She goes, see Benji? I said, yeah. So we went and we met Benji.
Nice.
Like, come here, darling. It's just, I said, this is Molly, my daughter. Come here, darling. And they got on like, hey, like house on fire, you know, drinking and laughing. And she was so mad. And that was beautiful, that musical thing. You know what struck me the other day as well? And this is really kind of weird. Well, not weird. I love Gogglebox. I don't know if you like Gogglebox.
Oh, it's great show. Yeah, it's so funny.
It's great. And the other day there was the guy on there that has dementia, and he had 4 notes that he played on a piano. And the London Symphony Orchestra came along and they made it into a symphony, and they played on it, and it was so emotional, it was so moving. And they all the people on Gogglebox are always usually quite brazen and funny. Every single one of them cried. You know, and they got, and that musical, when music does that to people, you know, it's just like, it touches things that nothing else in the world can touch. And on that note, on a very short note, my wife had a very serious accident 3.5 years ago, and she suffered a traumatic brain injury. She's good now. She's back to normal. She's banging on, nagging me just like that's normal. So that's, thank God for that. But at one point it was touch and go. But at one point she was laying in the hospital bed in St. George's in Tooting, God bless them. And she was still not there. And she loves Steven Tyler. And I thought, I wonder what would happen if I do this. And she was laying there, and I put a set of headphones on her, and I put on Aerosmith, and she just went, Steven. She heard Steven Tyler's voice and she smiled, and I thought, you're going to be all right, darling.
Yeah.
What a moment. But that's what music does, doesn't it? That's what I love so much.
Yeah, you're so right.
I fear it gets lost when you, I don't say it gets completely lost, but when you auto-tune it and put it on this and do this and do, and you take away that, I know there's probably songs that it's not true about where they still manage to capture it, but you know, the more ingredients that work together in a recipe, the better the cake's going to be, I think, personally. But that's just me. What do I know?
What do you know? Well, you've had a few decades at it, Mark, so I think you know quite a bit, to be honest.
Yeah, centuries, actually.
Amazing.
All good stuff.
Yeah. Interested to talk to you about, obviously, the bands and the guitar tones. We were listening to the bands from the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. And, you know, I was going through over the last few days your discography. And obviously the guitar tone changes over time. And I know that, I'm guessing, like, you know, the consoles obviously changed, and then digital came into the game and that side of things. Yeah. So did it change the way with all these new consoles, and when you went from analog and started implementing digital as well, maybe when you were recording? How did you approach the guitar amps? Because I noticed the guitar amps obviously in the 70s sounded completely different to the guitar amps in the 80s. So, and I think you said it before in a previous interview, it's all about, like we said, Anthrax. You said that it's about no one sounds like Anthrax because that's just how they play guitar, right? Yeah. But what I'm really interested to find out is about the way you would approach an amp when you're miking it up. Yeah. Or how you would approach it on the console, maybe, and how you'd approach stuff like EQ and a compression. So how did your approach change on guitar amps over time? Because I know for a lot of people, especially heavy guitar tones, man, they're really hard to get right when you're mixing or recording.
They're incredibly hard to get, and especially if you're trying to get them at source, which of course is what we did. And Glenn Tipton was always, you know, looking for the holy grail of guitar sounds, and struggled with rhythm guitar sounds, because heavy rhythm sounds are very and he hated it if it sounded like what he called chicken wire, you know. And we would try everything. You'd get the amp really, really quiet and say, well, that sounds pretty good, and they'd mic it up, but it didn't transform back into the speakers like that. And so you would try so many different ways, different microphones, different amps, different cabinets, and with Priest, see, I think Anthrax has got much more of a definitive guitar sound than Priest. I don't think they really have don't have a rhythm sound that you immediately associate with Judas Priest, as you may do with AC/DC, who have that, you know, much more chicken wire sound. I think Glenn would call it chicken wire. So with those guys, you know, it was a lot of experimentation and moving the mic, because if a guitar player hasn't got the sound that he wants, he can't play. You know, and these days in a studio, you run monster cable out from the amp head, which you have in the control room, out to the cabinet, and so you can still fine tune it and do this and that, and you might have a couple of the boxes in the way. So he's hearing the speakers, and he's hearing the record as it's meant. I always wanted everybody to try and listen to the record as it was going to be, like, it's, you know, we're finishing it, we're mixing it as we're going, we're doing it all along, all the time. It's always manifesting, getting better, and so when he's playing his guitar, it's part of almost the finished sound. So you can, with different mic placement on the cabinet, as obviously everybody knows, you know, nearer the cone you go, the center of the cone, the more top you'll get, the more you move it out, the bottom end you'll get. But I would put microphones on every speaker to start with and go through the speakers and listen to them and say, all right, and I would probably put Shaw 57s on them, but I would also put Sennheiser 421s on them as well nowadays. And then go through the different speakers, because they would all sound different. Each speaker sounded different in the one cabinet. And then, of course, you get the overall sound of them all. And sometimes you could just put them all up at once and you'd go, boom, there's the sound. As far as EQ, I wouldn't put any EQ on guitars. Like, I'd get the sound by moving the microphones and maybe adjusting the head a little bit, you know, to change the sound that's going out there. I certainly wouldn't EQ. And maybe when I was mixing, I might put a little bit 2K or 2.5, whatever it might need at that point, and maybe a touch of compression, maybe, not always, but maybe. So that would be the standard start for it. But probably the best way is just to pick one speaker that sounds good out of the four. And for me, I would put a 421 and a 57 on that, really. And you should be able to get something from that. You might want to do a couple of speakers, because that one might have a bit more bottom end. You might, you know, but you've got to be careful that they're not facing against each other, which can happen.
Yeah.
And if you put the microphones too far away, you're going to get phase problems. You know, and people go, well, it sounds great in the room, and I'm going, it won't sound, you just can't get it like that. The whole room sound you've got there, you can't get that through this. You could put ambient mics up and this, that, and the other, but that sound is going to take up a lot of space in your record if you've got all the ambience in it as well. Because the other thing is, when a band is playing and they're in that pocket that I talk about, and one of the reasons that sound gets better is, on top of the fact that they're now playing it properly, or playing it in their way, whatever you want to call it, but it's in a space of its own, and everybody's in their own space. And the one thing about obviously recording on the grid, which makes it easy for everybody, is that everything's perfectly in time, so everything's got loads of space for each other. Each bit's got plenty of space, you know. And it's up. So to make it work when it's a band, they create their own pocket, they create their own grid, if you like, and they all have to be in that grid together. And when they're all in that grid together, then they have space, and they can, you know, the sounds can work with each other. If something's, you can still make it work, a great big sound, but it depends on the song, which, more importantly than anything, is if you haven't got a song, you haven't got fuck all anyway. Because, you know, the bottom line is, if you haven't got a song, you know, why bother being there? So, but once you get that, you can mix things in different ways. It's very difficult with metal. Metal's much more right in your face. You know, it's very much in your face sort of sound. Whereas a lot of other things, you might have sounds that sit way back with a little bit of reverb on them. And I worked with a producer guy once called, it was a Steve Gibbons album. This guy was Alan Shacklock. And when we did this Steve Gibbons album, and when we came to mix it, he had a way of putting different room echoes and reverbs and all the different things, but not like big reverbs, tiny little touches, and everything just sat magically together. It just went doom. So, oh, that's a technique, and I learned from that as well. So as far as boards and EQs, I mean, I always loved the Neves. I always loved the Neves. You know, they're so warm, lovely. I always get there. When I did a couple of albums with the Wild Hearts, and I ordered in some Neve pre EQs. You know, the lot, the strip, the whole lot. I remember the woman from the record company said, well, why can't you just put them on afterwards? I said, no, it doesn't work like that, darling. The amplifiers are going through that, so it has to be done. Well, it's expensive. I'm like, well, if you don't want to do it, then we won't do it. You tell the band it's expensive, don't tell me. And so obviously we got what we wanted. Because back in the day, you always got what you wanted anyway. They didn't mind throwing the money around, which was good, because you didn't worry about money. You just went and made a record. You were free. And that was a great thing too. So yeah, I would get the Neve pre-EQs and use them for everything that I could, because I would never, SSLs are okay, and a lot of people love SSLs, but I always felt they didn't sound I felt they sounded a little bit tinnier than a Neve. I thought the Neve was fatter and warmer, and I preferred that sound. And obviously, when you recorded it to tape, you got that extra little bit of smoothness as well. The other thing that was interesting, of course, by recording to tape was what we used to do is we'd have the master tape, we'd record everything on there, and then we'd make a copy of the master, and we'd do all our overdubs on that and put the master tape away. So when we come to mix, we'd lock the two back up again. And the drums hadn't been going over the heads of the amp, the Judas or whatever it was, or the 3M or whatever, and losing some quality. So as you were overdubbing on the second tape machine and adding all the overdubs, you could, the drums were mixed down onto 2 tracks for a guide, and I'd end up keep adding a little bit of top all the time, because it was either me going deaf or they were getting worse. So when I came to mix and I locked them back up, these drums are all fresh, brand new, the original drums on the master tape, and you go, there's the top end, and there's what. So it didn't degenerate, which was a great thing as well, which helped the drum sound and everything better. I usually do the drums and the bass on that machine, then do the rest of it on the other machine. But we would record, because you didn't have a million tracks. We would quite often be forced into putting like a tambourine in the chorus on one track and a background vocal on the same track. You have to be careful, because you could quite easily fuck it up and wipe something. And then we would cut the mix. We would split them all off when we mixed, so that and then you could cut it and bring it in as and when you wanted, because we obviously used the computer board to mix it with. And the other thing, of course, is when we did Defenders of the Faith, we mixed it in Florida, and we used this antiquated system. And the way that worked was that the code that ran the computer had to, once you recorded it, you did a pass, you had to re-record that tone that controlled the computer over to another track. Well, if you're going over a song like 50,000 times, slowly but surely it starts getting slower and slower. There's a time lag, and all of a sudden all the cuts that you did at the beginning are now half a second late, or for half, so it's all gone. So you had to make, every time you made a pass, you had to make sure you did like 20 things at once, because you didn't want to be doing 500 passes. So you're still kind of mixing live almost. So me and Tom would be like, right, you bring that vocal in there, you do this, I'll ride that, and we'll go there, and we go through it. And if we got it right, we go, right, we keep that one. And then we didn't have to keep worrying about the cuts getting slower and slower as time went by. Occasionally they did, and we had to redo the cuts, but you get to work around, which is a pain in the arse. Don't get me wrong. It was in comparison what you can do nowadays. It was like people go, "What, are you fucking stupid doing it like that?" But we had fun.
Yeah, but that's again, it all comes back to that, though, doesn't it? It's about experimenting, having fun, and trying shit out. Why not? Exactly. Why not?
Exactly. And even when I mixed in the Ugly Kids record with Logic, because I had to learn Logic, and then echoes would happen and things happen. I go, oh, that's good. I have to keep that. It was an accident, but I go, that's great. Listen to that. And I would live. The beauty of that is that you can live with it for a day or two, and you can come back to it and fine tune it as well. And it's not going to go anywhere. And I went to see a friend of mine who's probably, again, this guy's a great mixing engineer, a guy called Mark Stent. Now, Mark Stent, I met when he was 16, working at a studio in Farnham called Jacobs. I was working with Sean Tyler and a few other bands and blah, blah, blah. And Mark was the assistant engineer who used to sleep in the barn. Lovely, lovely geezer. And of course, Mark's gone on to be probably the world's greatest mixing engineer, arguably, I suppose. I don't know. And I love him to pieces. But I went to see him in Los Angeles last time I was there. And we talked about this, that, and the other, and the good old days. And it transpired that he's got all his outboard equipment set up over here, and he's got it all set in one way and one way only. Nothing gets changed on that. Everything is written in stone. He said it has to stay that way. He said, and I control what goes on with it by the amount I send to it and the way I return it. Because if I've got to do a recall, I don't want to have to worry about where that was, because any tiny little thing can throw the balance of the mix, and you could struggle forever to try and find out where it's gone and what's wrong with it. So, and he's a great mixing engineer. You know, he's got great ears and a lovely bloke as well. He said he'd do a mix for me for nothing, and I've said that's good. So I've just got to find the right song for him to mix for me.
Brilliant. That's amazing.
Yeah.
It sounds like an amazing lad. So drums as well. So when you mentioned like you like to do some interesting things in newspapers, and you like to try different things out with pillows in the drums. So how do you like to mic up your drums? I know it's quite a long, maybe a long-winded question. But...
Yeah, I mean, it's the first way that I learned that was obviously the easiest way, and one of the ways that people still to this day look back upon and go, "Oh, how did you get that drum sound?" Or it could be John Bonham, or it could be Keith Moon, and that was down to Glyn Johns, really. And Glyn Johns used 3 microphones, so it was basically down to the drummer, because you can't do a lot with 3 microphones. You know, you can't EQ the fuck out of it without it sounding dramatically, changing the whole sound of the drums. So he would have a D12 on the bass drum, and they would put whatever they did in it, and then these 2 overheads, which was the way I learned to originally record drums. And as time went by, you know, then it got to when people put microphone on every tom-tom, you know, and then dampen this tom-tom and do that. So every drummer's, to me, the responsibility of the drums is the drummer. And I say to, you know, before going in the studio, I'll be like, let's make sure you got plenty of new skins, right? Let's not go in there with old skins that are going to sound like shit right off the bat. Let's make sure we've got everything we can. Let's make sure we've got 5 or 6 different snare drums if we can. And I always loved the Black Beauty snare drum because it invariably turned out to sound great. So you've got to start with a good set of drums. You know, you can't expect to sound great without a good set. Unless, you know, even having said that, I remember working with Phil Collins once. He came to Ramport and just jammed on a friend's thing. And there was just random bits of drum kit lying around, and he put them all together and made it into a kit. And away he went. He came and he said, "Fucking drums sound great, mate. Thanks a lot." And I was like, "Wow, Phil Collins, me." I thought that was good. But it was Phil Collins, you know, it was him. That's what made it sound good. Again, same with Simon Phillips or any good drummer. But it's their responsibility to have a sound and be, you know, aware of that fact. Charlie Benanti was great at that as well. You know, all good drummers sound good on most kits, but you know, get this stuff right in the first place, so we've got a fighting chance. The room is imperative as to how they're going to sound. You know, if you want to get a nice bit of room sound, you've got to pick the right spot in the room and compress the fuck out of it normally to get a good crack from a snare drum or whatever it might be. And then with the tom-toms, on the snare drum as well, the trick Tom Allen taught me was to put a mic. There's a hole in the side of the snare drum. If you put a 57 about 1/4 inch away from the hole, that's where the tss comes from, and it's really very audible. Tss, and you just get rid of the frequencies you don't like, the harshness, and on tom-toms, the one frequency that I think as a frequency in drums that me personally, I don't like is around about 330 hertz. And 9 times out of 10, that would be the first frequency that I'll get rid of. Now, when I say get rid of, I don't mean get rid of completely, because that gives you a gunk, gunk. I don't like that. I like boom, boom. So that's what I want to hear. You know, I want to hear the twack of the and boom. That's what I want to hear. And if the drummer's tuned nicely, they'll. Now, the length of that resonance is you can control with you can put a little dampener on there that flips up and down. That doesn't. If you put too much dampener on it, it will kill it. But if you can put like a tiny little bit of gaffer tape with a little thing that bounces off, and back as soon as the drum hits, it goes off and it comes back down, and it can't, you know, it soothes the sounds. Same on the snare drum. You can do that with an old bit of snare skin. You cut a bit of old snare skin out, put a bit of tape on it, and let it sit on the snare. And when the snare gets hit, it goes off and it comes back down, and it gets rid of any unwanted ring it can do. So you fuck around with it till you get that under control. And then, as I say, invariably I would just put 57s on everything, all tom-toms, the snare drum, and underneath the tom-toms, I also like the 421 on a kick drum, and then a Neumann 47 on the hi-hat, and 87s as overheads. And that's pretty much, if I've got that, I think that I should be able to get a reasonable drum sound from those microphone selection. Having said that, I don't mind trying. If somebody comes up and goes, "Oh, I love this microphone, I want to try it," I'll be the first one. "Oh, God, I'll give it a try." Then why not? If it's going to make my life easier, especially on a bass drum or something where the bass drums can be difficult. I worked at the studio once, and there were some guys in another room that I never saw. They'd been there 2 days, and they were just working on the bass drum sound for 2 days. I'm like, "What are you doing? Did you ever buy a record just of the bass drum sound?" "Oh yeah, Frankie Goes to Hollywood." No, but you know what I mean? You don't buy a record for the bass drum sound no matter what. No. And 2 days. If I was a record company guy, I'd have been, "What the fuck are you doing? What drugs are you on? Get rid of those drugs right away." But so yeah, and sometimes you'd get, and the other thing about that, Rich, as well, that you'd get the drum sound and you think they sound great, but then when the band played, it didn't sound great, or it didn't work, or it didn't sound. And that was the point that I made earlier. But when the band clicked, the sound changed, and it sounded great, And Bow Wow Wow were a great example of that. Me and Kenny Laguna did "I Want Candy" in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I mean, what the fuck we were doing in Albuquerque, I don't know. They were on tour. And Annabella Lewin, I think she was 15. She was a good little singer. And they were on tour, and we flew in there, and there was a town, literally like a typical American one-horse town with bales of straw rolling down the road. But out of the blue, there was a recording studio there as well, Albuquerque, New Mexico, somewhere in a town on the outskirts. And we went in there and we did "I Want Candy," and it was the first time that the drummer had played a snare drum. He'd always just played tom-toms. Kenny talked him into playing snare drum. And Kenny was a great musician as well. He could play piano and sing harmonies and everything. He's had everything, Kenny. But he wasn't an engineer type. That's why he got me in. And when we were doing "I Want Candy," and they were doing the riff and everything, it just didn't sound right. And all of a sudden they played it right. And it went boom. And there it was. And we go, "Oh." And, everybody goes, "Oh, that sounds great." And it's not me, really. But it is me a bit. But it's really you more than it is me. And that's the magic. So it's kind of a not having any control. And when all of a sudden it comes to life, you feel like you're achieving something and you're getting somewhere. I used to take home mixes of Suicidal back to the Oakwood apartments in California. And, my wife and her friends would go, "Wow, listen to rough mixes. These guys sound great. They sound great." And I say, "This is just rough mixes." And they go, "Well, they're fucking great." And then I'd play them the finished thing. And then they go, "Wow, this sounds really great." Because I got to live with the rough mixes. I could go home and have a beer and not think about being in control, but being a punter and listening to it and feel a bit, go, "Oh, that's not right. That bit's not like it should." And I'd write it down and go back and make sure the next time I listened to it, it was right. And so you're continually working on a mix as you're going along whilst recording the band. I always was anyway, and still am. I would, with the open kids, I'm always working on it as we go, So and that's what Whit wanted. He wanted to see me sitting in front of the board again. God bless him. He was the one that came to me and said, "Would you fancy doing our next album?" And I was like, "Fuck yeah, definitely, mate," because we're brothers, And then he said, "Well, how much money do you want?" I said, "I don't want any fucking money." I said, "Just, give me a bit of the record. If it ever sells anything, who gives a fuck? Let's just go make a record." Sonic Ranch is the studio in El Paso. And off we went and made the record. And for that, all that sort of thing, it's all good vibes. It's all about, I don't know, it's about a lot of stuff that I've talked about. It's all that shit put together in one big bag.
It's so good. Yeah, you know a lot. I keep repeating this, Mark. You know loads. It's phenomenal. Talking about gear that you're using maybe now or maybe what you used back then, I'd really like to have a chat with you about speakers. So what speakers are you listening on at the minute when you're doing your mixing, or maybe when you're doing recording or editing? How do you like to approach your speakers? What do you like?
I try to. Well, I've got to, when we there was some Genelecs in the studio in El Paso, which were nice and big and fat and bassy, and good to listen to for recording and overdubbing and stuff. But I would continually go back to my Proax. I've got a set of Proax. There they are. They're about this big. I know they're expensive shit. They're about that big. And the only reason I like them, or not the only reason, obviously I was like everybody else using NS10s for a long time, and I hate NS10s because they're just so fucking brittle and harsh. And Greg Calby uses Proax when he masters, and I'm like, well, I should be using Proax. I did try a lot of different other speakers, but Proax are the ones that suit me best. And it's all down to your own hearing and your ears and what I can't stand. I don't want to hear something that's brittle and harsh. It's like that's not comfortable for me. So the Proax have got a softer sound to them, but you have to work hard to get a good mix out of them as well. And I think that's not a bad thing. Again, as you know, it's very dependent on the room you're in. And you have to be comfortable with the room you're in so that you know where you're at. So for me, mixing the Ugly Kids here, I was continually comparing with different records that I've done in the past, other people's records, just frequencies in general and the way people position things and put things in their mixes. That's what I was excited to go and see Mark Stenton and listen to something he was mixing and think, I'm trying to delve, what's he doing? How's he doing that? Or why is he? And I think to myself, okay, I know where he's at and what he's doing. I can, But so Proax for me are my go-to speakers. I don't listen on headphones and mix. I just can't be bothered. And I've got a couple of funny little speakers here that I just put on every so often just to see that nothing's really fucked up. And Mark Stent's got like all kinds of speakers in his place. He's got a little tiny speaker sitting over here that he does something on. A couple of little tiny, whatever these audio things here are with the little man on them. And he's got about 5 or 6 different sets of speakers, even a tiny little speaker like that he'll listen to things on. And then you go through all of them, and when he's comfortable with all of them, then he knows where he's at. And I get that totally. But Proax were the ones I like. As I say, the Genelecs, I quite like them because they're fat and they're warm and you can turn them up loud. And people like to hear stuff loud and think that it's great, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's great when it's loud. It could be shit too.
Sure.
Volume can cover so many things, can't it? It can cover a lot of errors. So those I love. And then as far as outboard gear, I've always, I used to love the lexicons and this is going back, I suppose. They still get these things, the lexicons and AMS reverbs, weird things like that. But I also loved studios that had their own plates. So you have like Rampart had 2 big echo plates, and you could do anything with them. You could gate them. You could gate the plate, so you put a gate on it, so it would, boom, and shut down straight away. I love noise gates because you could do so many things with those as well. And I was listening to Aerosmith. Tommy, my kid, was playing Aerosmith, and I said, and in the middle of this one, I can't remember what song it is now, but there's a hand clap with a backward echo on it, and I go, oh, do you hear that? You hear why it's going? And he's like, what? And I go, that's the backward echo on the hand clap. And he's like, whatever, Dad. Shut up, Dad, you boring fucker. But I when I listen to music, I hear all that sort of thing. So those like Yuri's 1176 and LA3As. One thing Glenn Johns did that blew me away was he's got Pete Townsend playing acoustic guitar. He puts an 87 about 3 feet away from him, and he double compresses it through an 1176 and an LA3A, and it makes the whole microphone so sensitive that you could hear Pete breathing, literally. So he says to Pete, if you make any sudden noises, it's not going to work. But if you just play the guitar, it'll sound amazing. And if you ever listen to what Glyn John's acoustic guitar sounds, they are fucking great. And that was just using that microphone. It may have just been the Rampart room as well that happened to work for that. And then, like, as I said, an 1176 and then another compressor on top of the 1176. And of course, the balancing of those up is the trick to get that right, which I can't describe. You just have to fuck around with it. And I use that now all the time. I use that on the Ugly Kids last album, that technique, to do that. But again, there was a guitar player, a classical guitar player that I worked with, and he went into a room and he put like 5 microphones around in this room, and I let him balance the microphones. His friend played the guitar while he got this, and he pushed up these microphones. He said, "That's how it should sound." I go, "Great." And he went in and he played, and when he played, the guitar sat in the track and sounded so fucking good. It was unbelievable. It just was so big and fat and clear. It didn't get in anybody else's way. It just sounded incredible. Now, this guy was a great guitar player, but his mixture of the microphones in different places in the room, that's what made that happen. I could probably spend a couple of hours trying to make that happen. He did it in 5 minutes, but he lives in his guitar. His guitar's inside his guitar. His head's right in it. You know what I mean? He knows exactly what he wants it to sound like. So. But it was amazing. So there's all these little things that you learn as you go by that can help to make things sound better. And then there's, of course, the extremes you go to where you just fuck it up completely and distort the fuck out of it. Like, just for the hell of it. There's a song called Sucker Punch by the Blackhearts where it was the first time I think I worked with them. And I think they liked me because there was a bit in the song that was just so long. And I was like, why is that there like that for that long? And they whoa. I go, well, let me cut it in half. So I cut it in half and they went, oh, that's actually much better. But then Ginger was like, I want my vocal to be distorted. And I go, I put a bit distortion. No, fucking distorted. I go, all right then, let's see. I went to the extreme. And you go, yeah, that's what I want. So you go, fucking great. Why not? Why not? Distort the fuck out of it. And it just wasn't what you'd expect to do. People liked it though. So
do you use saturation?
In what way?
Well, when you're mixing.
What, to tape?
Yeah, or do you use any saturation plugins or anything along those lines, or any saturation outboard, or none of that? That's interesting.
Not that I know of. Not that I know of. I mean, I just use stuff that I like the way it sounds, and it's funny because in Logic you work with what you got, and you just do what you can. And I'm sure there's a lot of aficionados out there going, oh, well, you can't do that and you can't do that. But in Logic, there's a lot of bits and pieces that are good. I got Sound Toys and added that up in there. I quite like the Sound Toys plugin. That's got some good little effects in it. But the majority of the things in there, some of the EQs are they're not great, but then you can put 2 or 3 EQs in place to compensate for it. In an ideal world, I would have like outboard EQ that I could get my hands on and use, it would be ITT or some Neve EQs or whatever, just those outboard EQs that I used to use at Rampart all the time. And they were smooth and nice, and you could do anything with them. I like those kind of EQs. Whereas in Logic, they're a bit higgledy-piggledy. They're not really nice and smooth and warm. So you have to work around them, and you work with what you've got. You have to, because is it going to affect sales? You have to question yourself at the end of the day. And realistically, I could mix the Ugly Kids album again on a Neve board, but it's not going to fucking change sales at all. And if there's no songs there,
True.
And there's not a vocal on there that makes sense and it's got the right emotion in it, then it's not going to make any difference anyway. So, I don't know how many people in the street. I think you can get a bit too wrapped up in that, though, albeit though I'm sure, there's some brilliant engineers out there. There's people with incredible ears and people that reamp their, you can get a guitar going ticky, 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 and you can reamp it and turn it to, which is, but how did the guy what I don't get is if a heavy metal guitar player is playing on a record, surely he wants to hear when he's playing. You can't go ting, 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 and then send it to the producer and say, reamp it and make it sound heavy. It's like, how did you play it without? It didn't sound heavy when you played it. So how did you play it? You didn't really play it heavy, did you? Because you feel that when you play it.
Yeah.
You feel that heaviness. And some rhythm guitar players these days that I've worked with, they're fucking unbelievable. The Scott Ian's a great rhythm guitar player. Yeah. Mike Clark from Suicidal was fucking ridiculous rhythm guitar player. So if I could steer clear of outboard things, except where I'm using them for effects and that, I would. But as I say, that 1176, they're all go-to stuff, really. I used to love the old Eventide delays and stuff like that. And back in the day, we used to use tape delay, literal real tape delay, you know, you had to jump up.
Yeah.
We used to with a vary speed on it and to, you know, and delay the plate through the tape, stuff like that. And after a while, it just got print through on it, and you could hear all the noise. You had to quick get a new reel of tape, and I had a technique down where I could get the tape off, put it back on, boom. It's like change, like Formula One wheel change. So, you know, and then so that we could keep it going through the whatever you were doing at that particular moment. But we used to use a lot of tape delays, and as I say, echo plates. And I think Rampart had 2 echo plates that were very popular and were part of the sound of that studio. As was there's a chamber, an echo chamber in one of the studios in New York that Bruce Springsteen loves. It's his, as far as everybody said, oh, that's his echo chamber. And I went there to do a mix. I was doing a mix, a Bow Wow Wow mix, and I based my mix around this echo chamber. I was using it, and then someone just came in and said, "Bruce is here," and I was like, "Yeah," and they said, "Well, he wants his chamber," and I'm like, "But I've got my mix." They said, "We're bad luck. He wants his chamber." I'm like, "Okay, Bruce can have the chamber. What am I going to do?" I never did a fucking mix, but you know. Good old days, though. Good times. You know, I met Bruce in the studio in New York. My friend Joe Grusecki was a great friend of Bruce's, and he was in the Iron City House Rockers, and he called me. He said, "I'm in the studio with Bruce Springsteen." And I was in another studio in New York, Electric Lady, working on a band called Shooty's Groove, kind of a rap band, and it was an interesting rap band with heavy metal guitars. They were good guys, good band. And I ran over to this other studio. He said, "Come and meet Bruce." And I walked in, and I was like, wow. And I walked in, and hey, Bruce. He says, "Hey, how you doing?" Have a bit of a chat. And there were all these guys they had like 8 amps outside, and they were trying all these different amps, and they were doing these different mic presses. And Bruce came and he said, "I wish they'd make their fucking minds up. I just want to play guitar, get on with it." You could have plugged Bruce into any of those, and it would have sounded great. You know, it's like, but there's somebody just, "Oh, try this one, try this. Let me just plug in and play," which was, you know, but it's nice to meet Bruce Springsteen. Nice to meet Neil Young. You know, nice to meet all these fucking icons, people that I just never got to meet Jagger or Bowie. And if you look at Jagger and Bowie doing Dancing in the Streets, that has to be one of the greatest fucking things. That's so fucking great what they did, those two. Isn't it amazing? I watched that and I listened to Young Americans by David Bowie. And every time I hear that, I can hear something I didn't hear before. And it's probably 24-track recording. But there's just something about it. It's just like
so good. Yeah. So I was watching. Was I watching the other night? I can't remember if it was on BBC Two or something like that. But it was. I just literally just caught it, and I don't usually watch much TV. I'm online. You know, that's usually the way like a lot of people I consume stuff now, like YouTube and all that sort of stuff. But Queen was on, and literally I was just transfixed, absolutely transfixed, just watching the whole band play live, like back in the late 70s. And just like watching Brian May, like how he used to play guitar and the sounds he could get, and just by using was it a penny, I believe, or something like that Brian used to use, and Freddie as well, man, it's so incredible. Freddie as well, it's like just like his musicianship was just, it was unbelievable.
It really was. And you know, if you think about the way they constructed Bohemian Rhapsody and the way they put that together, and you listen to it now, and it's timeless, you just go, that's as good as Beethoven or fucking Mozart or anybody you care to mention. You know, all those guys, all the Townsends and the Jaggers and the Bows. And I was lucky enough when Queen had their first hit single, Seven Seas of Fire. Back in the day, you had to go in the studio and re-record it because of the BBC and unions before you did Top of the Pops. So what everybody did was they'd go in the studio and they'd distract the guy from the BBC and swap the tapes and just give him back the master. You didn't actually re-record it. But I was just a T-boy then, and in walks the whole troupe, Freddie, the whole lot, you know, and they all sat up and pretended they were going to re-record. But I was fortunate enough to be there and meet these people. I met the drummer again when I was working with Priest and Ibiza. But to meet these people and hang out with them, it's awe-inspiring, and just see what they're like, and they're all so fucking nice. Also, the majority of these people are just fucking everyday nice people, really lovely, polite people that have just got something special about them, and you meet them, and it just makes you feel better. Really, cheers you up, gives you.
Absolutely. Oh, mate. Well, no, thank you so much, though, for tonight, though. It's been absolutely phenomenal. Loved.
I hope I wasn't too boring or waffling on about
No, it's been absolutely phenomenal. It's been so good. Absolutely brilliant. But no, everyone who's been watching today, thank you so much for joining as well. It's been amazing. And Mark, again, thank you so much for your time. It's been phenomenal.
My pleasure.
Phil, thank you. Feel free to stick around, Mark, when we go offline in a moment as well. But yeah, thanks again to everyone this evening. And also as well, we're going to be re-uploading and editing this video, so it'll go back onto YouTube. So check us out, our community on Facebook, which is Produce, Mix, Fix and Conquer. So if you go on to communities, you'll be able to find us on there. And also as well, if you go on to YouTube, it's youtube.com/Produce, Mix, Fix and Conquer. But Mr. Mark Dodson, thank you, sir, for such a great evening.
All right, take care. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.